Committee members, I will call the meeting to order as we do have a quorum and we respected the timeline from the conclusion of the vote in the House of Commons. I would also remind committee members that it is our intention and approval to have a full 2-hour meeting. Can't hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Chair, did you just say that the meeting will be 2 hours?
Yes. The meeting, so I'll advise those that may have other commitments to arrange for replacement. I've been advised we're approved for 2 hours from the time I called the meeting. So it was roughly around 5 o'clock. So we will be proceeding. The first hours is the public meeting with witness on housing. The last hour is committee business. So as I indicated, I'll call the meeting to order. Those appearing virtually have been sound tested and we're fine. Before I begin, I want to remind members again to keep your earpiece in the assigned place when you're not using it, or actually if you unplug it, it would work best. Please avoid touching the microphone boom while it's live to prevent hearing damage to the interpreters. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format according to House of Commons rules that were adopted. Members are appearing in person in the room and virtually, as well as witnesses. I would like to remind all those appearing that you have the option to choose to speak in the official language of your choice. In the room, use the headpiece and choose the official language of your choice. If you're appearing virtually, click on the globe icon on the bottom of your surface and choose the official language of your choice. If there is an interruption in interpretation, please get my attention. We'll suspend while it's being corrected. Pursuant Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, February 12, 2024, committee is continuing study of federal housing investments. I would like to welcome the following witness. We have in the room Steve Pomeroy, industry professor, Canadian Housing Evidence Collaborative. David Horwood, director, Effort Trust Company. And from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, Tim Richter, president and chief executive officer. We will begin with Mr. Pomeroy for 5 minutes or less. Mr. Pomeroy, you have the floor.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note that we're having this echo, and I just want it to be on record. And then I noticed that we now have virtual interpreters today, and we're having the same issue. So I would just like that to be on record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pomeroy. 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for inviting me today. I think the topic you're studying is important, not because we can change what we did in the past, but we can learn from the past to make sure we don't repeat these errors in the future. And the big error is the absolute lack of transparency and reporting out on what we have been doing with federal investments and the number of units that were created over the last 2 decades. That data reveal that if we maintained the level of investment that we did between 1990 and 1994 before the termination of social housing programs, roughly 10% of completions in those years, we would have actually added another 330,000 units to our stock of non-market community housing in this country and gotten us total to about 1 million units in total. I have shared with the committee members a brief that has the bilingual data with the data for these particular years. And I'll come back to some specific recommendations about how I think we can improve transparency going forward. In terms of the three questions that your committee has asked, how much federal investment did we make? How many non-market units of non-profit and co-op did we create? And how many private sector rental units did we create? I have put together a detailed data piece that I've shared with you. This data was not easy to put together. I had to mine many sources, identify areas where CMHC officials themselves didn't even know the data existed within their various files, because I used to work there in the early 80s, 90s, and I kind of knew where it was. So it's not readily transparent, and it was a difficult task to put that together. The bottom line is, between 2001 and 2016, we created 41,000 new non-profit units, 10,596 cooperative housing units, and just over 238,000 private rental units. And that was using a federal investment of $4.17 billion, much of which was actually through cost-shared programs, so that was augmented by provincial cost-sharing in those programs as well. That money flowed directly to the non-profits and co-ops, not to private rental. That wasn't subsidized during that particular period. So in total, non-profit and co-op was about 2% of total completions, and the private rental sector was only 9% of the total completions of 2.7 million units over those years. So most of our housing was, in fact, directed to the homeownership sector. The fact we undersupplied rental housing for those 20 years is a significant impact in the current affordable crisis, where the lack of rental supply now being exacerbated by high levels of immigration, that students and foreign workers who are renters, is contributing to the rental problem. The funding sources for that $4.17 billion came from three places. A program called Investments in Affordable Housing started in 2001, provided around about $125 million a year. That was augmented in 2006 budget as a result of a negotiation between Paul Martin and Jack Layton, which created three affordable housing trusts totaling $1.4 billion that was flowed over the 2006 to 2008 period. And subsequently, during the economic recession or the global financial crisis recovery, Canada's Economic Action Plan contributed $2 billion in 2009-2011, about $1 billion of which was directly to new supply. The other $1 billion was for social housing retrofit. So that's where those numbers actually come from. As I mentioned, it is very difficult to put this data together, and we just don't have good data sources. CMHC used to produce, from 1955 to 2016, a very detailed statistical document that was very much used to many researchers like myself to actually understand what was going on in terms of total housing starts, the mortgage market, insured lending, as well as public investment and social housing outcomes. Since the programs were terminated in 1994, at the end of 1993, those tables have been diminished, and the publication has ceased completely. So we really don't have good data going forward, certainly not since 2016 on this information. In terms of recommendations, in the old days, prior to 2002, as part of CMHC's Starts and Completion survey, they had a box on the survey form that counted which units were funded under a National Housing Act program or affordable social housing. And that stopped being collected, even though we continued to collect data at every single start of whether it's rental, whether it's condo, whether it's home ownership. Simply adding a box back to what is now an iPad, is where the enumerators collect that data, would allow us to have data on a monthly basis and be able to put it into our monthly housing statistics, along with information on rental and ownership housing. As I mentioned, many of the programs in the past were funded under cost-shared programs with the provinces, and under the National Housing Strategy, that's also the case, but for a small part of the National Housing Strategy. Only three particular programs, about 10% of total funding in the National Housing Strategy, are funded through bilateral agreements. As part of those agreements, CMHC imposed a very onerous 12-sheet spreadsheet requirement for the provinces to report data to CMHC for the purpose of claiming their cost-sharing amounts. No similar, and there's an accountability framework around that, a set of an action plan and a set of targets. That's 10% of the National Housing Strategy. CMHC does not apply that policy to itself. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. It would be great if this committee directed CMHC to produce the same type of level of data collecting and accountability for the unilateral federal programs that is done for the provinces. And my final point would simply be to then make sure that the data is published in the kind of tables that we used to have, so it's available to researchers, to parliamentarians, and to taxpayers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Horwood for 5 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to address the Standing Committee as you continue your study of federal housing investments. My name is David Horwood. I'm a principal at Effort Real Estate Corporation and the Effort Trust Group of companies based in Hamilton, Ontario. Our group are active in the management and development of rental housing properties across Ontario. We are a third-generation family business, proud to serve customers from across the rental housing spectrum, and we take our responsibility as housing professionals and tenant advocates very seriously. We're active members of numerous industry associations that advocate for sensible housing policy at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. As has been shared to this committee in the recent past, purpose-built rental housing plays a critical role in Canada's housing continuum, with more than 10 million Canadians living in private market rental housing. In the 1960s and 1970s, our business, like countless others across the country, were engaged in the development of rental buildings that served the demand from people who both choose and needed the flexibility that professionally managed rental, as opposed to formal home or condominium ownership, could provide. However, due to a variety of factors, the most impactful being legislative changes federally and provincially that serve to impede, restrict, complicate, or increase cost of development, our business, just like countless others, stopped building rental housing. Simply put, we could no longer advance projects for which we had no reasonable prospect of earning a modest return, let alone one that justified the major risks inherent in projects of this financial and engineering complexity. Although we have continued to manage and reinvest in our existing portfolio of rental properties, we have avoided all new construction projects until very recently. The introduction and subsequent refinement of CMHC programs to foster new rental housing construction have been of critical importance to allowing us to return to the new construction business. The program, formerly known RCFI, now called Apartment Construction Loan Program, whereby federal funds are loaned to developers at below market interest rates and subject to very strict qualifying criteria. This program has been one such vital initiative. The MLI Select program, another offering of CMHC, has been very useful for many developers, including us, in trying to de-risk and reduce the cost of new rental construction projects. The rebate of GST on new rental construction and corresponding PST rebate in many provinces also serves to make new rental projects more viable by reducing a major cost item. I commend the current government for finally taking this step after years of deliberation. However, the regulations about this rebate remain incomplete, and this will only delay new projects from starting, further delaying the vital increase in supply which it is intended and should create. I strongly encourage you to consider a few simple adjustments to existing programs and further revisions to the legislation around rental housing as follows. Firstly, the Apartment Construction Loan Program was revised in April to require that applications be virtually ready to start, or shovel ready, as is said in the industry. Although I understand that CMHC would like to consider projects that are ready for construction, I can tell you that as a proponent of such applications, it is nearly impossible to commit to a final building design with all the required supporting studies and reports until one has actually been approved for the program. It's a classic chicken versus egg problem. We won't finalize until we are approved, but we can't even apply until we are finalized. The process is serving as a major disincentive to new applications. Secondly, just last week, changes to the MLI Select program of CMHC were introduced, and they have already been widely criticized by the development industry. One major change has the consequence of reducing the potential rental revenue that can be charged, and the result is clearly a roadblock to projects being financially viable. The outcome will be dire. Far fewer buildings using this previously advantageous financing program will be contemplated. And lastly, the rebate of HST is planned to apply strictly to projects that started September 14th, 2023 or later, the date of announcement. Developers who started rental projects earlier in 2023 or in 2022 that won't be finished until this year or next year do not qualify for this critically important incentive. I suggest that consideration be given to allow projects that started before this arbitrary date be allowed to qualify under the strict condition that any incentive be mandated to apply on an incremental additional rental project. What would happen? We will see experienced, proven builders be incentivized to build more buildings, resulting in more supply and more choice for rental households quickly. I'm mindful of the time and would love to talk further about taxation of new projects and the MERB program that would lead to far more construction very quickly. I will limit my remarks, and I thank you for the opportunity to share my comments. Like you, I'm eager to work together to achieve a measurable improvement in the housing market during what we would all agree is a period of crisis in affordability, in supply, and in stability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horwood. We'll now go to Mr. Richter for five minutes.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Tim Richter. I lead the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. I'm happy to join you from Calgary. So, homelessness is a housing affordability problem. It's driven by high rent and low vacancy. It's not caused by mental illness or addiction. So the surge in homelessness we're seeing today and in 10 cities, as your study is discussing, is the result of the cost of living crisis. So I'm going to discuss this with a bit of an analogy. So you've all seen, you know what I mean when I talk about musical chairs, right? Musical chairs, you get 10 kids around 10 chairs. And imagine in this game, there's one little kid, a girl named Alice, who's got a broken ankle. So the music starts, they take a chair away, the music starts, and the kids all sit down except Alice. So if you asked Alice, you said, well, how come you're not in a chair? She'd say, well, it's because I've got a broken ankle and I couldn't get to a chair fast enough. But is Alice not in a chair because she's got a broken ankle or because there's not enough chairs? The fact is there's not enough chairs. So when we measure inflation using the consumer price index, right? Unfortunately, the CPI measures inflation based on a middle income basket of goods. For low income Canadians, 80-90% of their income goes to pay for food and housing costs. So for them, the inflation rate isn't 2 or 3 or 4 or even 6%. It's tied to the cost of the two biggest ticket items that they have to pay for, food and housing. Now, depending where you live, we've been seeing food increases 10% a year and rent increases over 20%. And that's what low-income households are facing. That's their real inflation rate. And they have far less ability to absorb these incomes. So now imagine you're struggling with a health issue. You don't have friends or family to rely on. You're in a low-income household. You don't have any spare income at the end of the month. Or maybe you struggle with addiction or acute mental health concerns. When rents skyrocket and availability of units decrease, low-income households or people with other needs end up forced out of their homes. And like Alice, they can't compete when there aren't enough affordable housing options or chairs. I'm old enough to remember a day when mass homelessness like we see it today didn't exist. The roots of our current homelessness crisis and the surge you see in 10 cities, as you're talking about, are tied to the roots of our housing crisis. And that began in 1980 with the federal withdrawal from incentives to support rental housing construction, and then subsequent reductions in affordable social co-op housing investment through the 80s, and the elimination of federal affordable housing programs in 1995, 1996. Right, as Steve could tell you in great detail about all of the housing programs in between then and now, this is a problem that's over 40 years in the making. So if we want to solve homelessness, we need to ensure that we have a healthy housing system, and a system where there's affordability and choice from social housing to ownership. The whole system needs to be healthy. If the ownership system isn't working, isn't affordable, people stay in rental. If the rental system isn't affordable, isn't balanced, there isn't a balanced market, the burden falls on the non-market, and people are pushed out the bottom. So to resolve these, we need a clear federal strategy to eliminate homelessness. And importantly, as the Auditor General has highlighted, we need to connect the housing strategy with the homelessness objective and the homelessness strategy. And we need to have an approach that's grounded in cooperative federalism. And this is perhaps the greatest weakness in the federal government's approach today. Solving homelessness requires a national strategy with an approach similar to disaster response, where there's a plan and there's an agreement between the different levels of government on who does what within their different jurisdictions. So if you imagine any natural disaster as it plays out, the local government leads, the community leads, and provincial and federal governments come in and support, right? That's a key to the approach to ending homelessness. The federal government needs to also return to the federal government's return to housing leadership with the National Housing Strategy and the new housing plan are welcome and long overdue. There's a lot in there. I think that's really positive, and previous speakers have talked about it. And it should be successful, I believe, if implemented well, in expanding rental and non-market housing construction, but that'll take time. In my mind, the Achilles heel of the housing plan and the housing strategy is the absence of federal, provincial, territorial coordination and collaboration. You could implement measures like the GST reduction, for example, or accelerated capital cost allowance, but if developmental charges eat up all of that freed up space, you're no further ahead. But I'll leave you with three quick recommendations. First, I would recommend a national strategy for the prevention and elimination of homelessness, built in collaboration with the provinces and territories, with cities and experts as well, including people with lived experience, where municipal government or community leaders lead the response to homelessness, and other levels of government come in their areas of jurisdiction. Like when you're fixing your plumbing or your electricity, you need to turn off the electricity, you need to turn off the water before you can fix the system. We really need a measure that's going to slow the flow of people into homelessness. The only way to do that in the short term is with a homelessness prevention and housing benefit, some form of income support in the short term to prevent people from becoming homeless. The vast majority of people who are on core housing need, who are at risk of homelessness, are in housing. And final point, a national housing court, a true national court built with the provinces and the territories that addresses the health of the whole housing system, that must include the creation of at least 655,000 units of social and affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Richter. We'll now begin with Ms. Gray for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. My questions are for Mr. Richter. Just to confirm that you said in your opening statement that the cost of living crisis is the biggest reason for the homelessness crisis.
It would be cost of living crisis compounded by the housing. So it's created by the housing crisis, and it's been compounded by the cost of living crisis, yes.
Great, thank you. The Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on the government's homelessness program, the Reaching Home program, found that since 2018, the number of homeless Canadians has increased by 20%. Does this increase reflect homeless numbers for what your organization is seeing as well?
I think that is a very conservative estimate. I think the numbers are quite a bit higher. Our data on homelessness in Canada isn't great. We've seen increases in some of the communities we're working with, increases in chronic homelessness from 50 to 100%.
Okay, thank you. That was actually going to be my next question, so thank you for answering that. Homeless encampments have become increasingly common. Is this the highest number of encampments that you've seen in Canada?
Yes, in my memory, yeah, I would say that's fair.
Okay. The Liberal government's National Housing Strategy initially set a target of reducing chronic homelessness by 50% by 2027 to 2028. Is Canada on track to meet that target?
Short answer is no. I think that I think the critique of the federal government's homelessness approach that was put forward by the Auditor General is probably the most comprehensive. I would say the couple of challenges. They said they wanted to reduce chronic homelessness by 50%. The question is 50% of what? I'm not sure they have a good baseline. They have point in time counts, but in my mind, those aren't the most accurate approach, but they are good for what they are. The other thing I think is important is that the federal government reaching home is a program. It's not a strategy. And it's the challenge that the Auditor General highlighted that I think is accurate is that the government's homelessness goal wasn't matched with their housing plan. So that if homelessness is a housing problem, your housing strategy has to reflect your homelessness objective.
Right.
And I don't believe that to be the case at this point.
Great, thank you very much for that. The Liberals put Infrastructure Canada in charge of the government's program for reducing and ending chronic homelessness. However, Infrastructure Canada has not adopted reducing and ending chronic homelessness as a performance indicator for its homelessness program, which is listed as one of their core responsibilities. So in your opinion, shouldn't a government department in charge of reducing and ending chronic homelessness have that as a performance indicator for how their programs are doing?
Yes.
Thank you. I agree. Infrastructure Canada is also running the Veteran Homelessness Program, and yet we've heard that more homeless veterans are being found all the time. Do you believe Infrastructure Canada is administering that program well?
I haven't seen that. Well, in full disclosure, we will be receiving some funding from that program to support communities in ending homelessness for veterans. I was also involved with the unanimous House of Commons motion in 2019. I am concerned that there was a motion in the House of Commons in 2019 calling for the federal government to eliminate homelessness for veterans and create a program. That has taken a couple of years now, and the money, to my knowledge, has not moved into communities yet. So it's
Okay.
the program hasn't been implemented, so I can't tell you if it's working or not.
Okay, thank you for that. Infrastructure Canada, actually, I'll move on to something else here. The government tabled documents recently in the House of Commons showing $153,600,000 from the 5 fiscal years 2019 to 2023 were spent on government bureaucracy to administer federal government programs on reducing homelessness. So is this spending helping to reduce homelessness, or is it just creating more red tape and bureaucracy?
I don't know how they spent the money, so I'm not entirely sure how I can answer the question.
Thank you. Since you spoke to this committee regarding the housing crisis last year, housing starts are down 9% and rents are up 9.3%. So is this the worst you've seen Canada's housing market in your time as housing and homelessness advocate?
I would say, I think, yeah, it's fair to say that this is among the most challenging rental housing environments that I've seen, yes.
Liberal ministers in their 2024 budget state that they will build 3.87 million homes by 2031, or around 550,000 homes per year. Is building 550,000 homes attainable in 2024, given what you're seeing and hearing?
You'd have to ask the development community that. I think, in fact, my colleague, Steve Pomeroy, might be better positioned to answer that question than I am.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. We will now move to Mr. Collins for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the witnesses for their attendance today. I'll start with Mr. Horwood. Mr. Horwood, you probably heard the opening from Mr. Pomeroy, who talked about some of the financial changes that were made over several administrations, both Liberal and Conservatives, that reduced the amount of resources that flowed through to the housing sector, and in particular the affordable housing sector. in your opening, you referenced changes, legislative changes that were made at the federal and provincial levels that sort of disincentivized your sector to build more units. The National Housing Strategy has sought to incentivize for-profit organizations to build more supply. That certainly is the goal of the apartment loan program. And I know that you've participated in that program. Can you talk about your experience with that program and whether that program played a role in your decision-making to build new supply, not just in Hamilton or elsewhere?
Thank you, MP Collins. Speaking to the programs offered by CMHC, in particular, the apartment construction loan program, at the time of our applications, it was known as Rental Construction Financing Initiative. I can say that those programs were instrumental and vital in allowing us to refine our construction budgets in order to proceed with the new rental construction. So very simply, without the RCFI and without apartment construction loan program, we would not have started the buildings that are underway today. CMHC has been very good about reaching out and consulting within the development industry and talking to and connecting with apartment managers such as ourselves, and they have been very consultative. That being said, there remain improvements and tweaks that could be made, should be made, that I believe will continue to have a very impactful result on bringing new supply to market. And changes that get made are sometimes hard for us to understand in short-term doses, but when we have a better opportunity to review and consult with CMHC and to do that more regularly, I do believe that they'll listen and that they will try to find ways to continue to improve the programs.
Thanks, Mr. Horwood. There's a lot of debate here over the last several months in terms of the GST waiver on purpose-built rentals. The debate is centered around whether or not, and you've given some great recommendations for us to consider, the debate is centered around whether or not that waiver should continue on the affordable rental market for those nonprofits and municipalities that are building new units in that area, as well as whether that GST waiver should extend to your industry for purpose-built rentals in the market sector of the housing industry. Can I get your opinion on whether or not that's going to assist with the legislation as it's written right now, understanding that you need to see the regs, and whether or not that should continue for the next several years as it relates to incentivizing new supply in the market area?
Absolutely. Thank you. I would point out that the question isn't whether it should continue. It was, why was it ever introduced on residential construction, on residential apartment construction, where we have no input tax credits on revenue? Why would we be paying HST or GST? Now, that being said, that is a decision that long predates my involvement in the industry. What I can say is that the reduction or the proposed rebate of the GST from our basket of construction costs is a major, major step forward. And I do believe that when the regs are introduced and when we understand, and as importantly, when the lenders to our industry understand the mechanism for that reduction or elimination of that line item being in major, and ideally with corresponding provincial matching, that will go a very long way, and it would serve to reduce a construction budget by theoretically something in the 10% range. That is a major reduction in expense, and that should bring projects that were marginal or slightly below a reasonable threshold, both from a developer's perspective as well as from a financing perspective. It should allow those projects to go ahead. So I do think that is a critical lever that is being pulled. And I do hope that the regulations relating to it get defined very quickly. As I've suggested, there are ways that could be broadened to include projects that have not yet made their final HST or GST self-assessment. And if there was some way that that the potential incentive or the potential reduction in cost could be grandfathered to existing projects so long as it gets reinvested in a subsequent and incremental new construction project. I think that would serve to bring experienced builders back to the table very quickly and ultimately bring more supply to the table.
Thanks, Mr. Horwood. Mr. Pomeroy, in the minute I have remaining or less, you, oh, thank you. You talked about we've lost 330,000 units from losing the programs that we had in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And there was reference earlier to the MERB program. Can you talk about whether that's something that needs to come back?
Well, they're two different things. I spoke about the I spoke about the affordable housing, social housing. The MERB was specifically on the private rented sector as a stimulus, and it essentially replaced, it brought back tax changes that were implemented in 1972 temporarily for 8 years from 74 to 81. And as Mr. Horwood has indicated, that did have a positive effect on stimulating rental construction during that period.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Madame Chabot, pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and dear witnesses. Once again, I know that for some of you, to have your presence again, and we are very happy to have your useful testimonies today. Mr. Richter, thank you for having come back to this committee. I know how important your association is on the issue of homelessness. This is a very preoccupying subject, of course, because this phenomena, even though it did exist previously, has shot up in importance in many, many regions in Canada. And in Quebec, we have more than 10,000 people, which is not inconsiderable. And the report, the parliamentary budget report for May 2024, and I think we talked about it, that we have a national strategy on housing, and the initial goal was to reduce by 50% homelessness by 2027-28, and the government is talking about 2030 now. So in any case, the parliamentary budget officer has said that we must reduce chronic homelessness by 50% by 2030, and it would mean $3.25 billion a year to fix this. That's just 7 times what we have budgeted right now in the National Housing Strategy. What do you think of this remark?
Well, thank you for your comment. I'm thrilled to be back. Honestly, I think the parliamentary budget officer's report was actually quite flawed. Reaching Home is a program, and by itself won't solve homelessness. So you could add lots of money to Reaching Home, and you likely wouldn't solve homelessness unless you solve the housing crisis. And to my mind, you need to, a critical component of that is going to be increasing, probably doubling, the percentage of social and deeply affordable housing in Canada's overall housing system. That would be about 655,000 units, which is on its own probably $700 billion worth of investment, and not something that the federal government can do on its own. What I think is important here is that the homelessness goal, the homelessness objective, and I'll remind the committee as well that the government, in a speech from the throne that I believe was in 2020 or 2021, committed to the elimination of chronic homelessness. I think it's important that the homelessness goal be matched with a housing strategy, and there needs to be a strategy to plan. How are you going to achieve that goal? This is the challenge. We've got National Housing Strategy. We have a new housing plan, and there are some excellent elements in both that I'm very supportive of. But Reaching Home is a program. It's not a strategy. And simply putting more money into that program, if you don't align the homelessness, don't align the housing strategy to that goal, and produce a lot more deeply affordable and social housing, and have a healthy rental market, and begin to work on fixing the ownership market as well, you're going to really struggle to end homelessness. So I think, unfortunately, the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report was deeply flawed, and I would point the committee to the Auditor General's report of, I believe, last year.
So during your appearance, we were looking at the issue of the financing. You had made 7 proposals to remedy to the lack of affordability in housing. And one of them was mentioned by other groups as well, the idea of creating an acquisition fund to allow NGOs to buy rental units and therefore protect the rental rates. Among these propositions, do any of these feel better in order to try and find solutions to the housing crisis? Because that is the actual issue right now. It is an issue that is there. So in your proposals that you had made and your solutions, is there one of them that you would like to particularly emphasize?
I'd have to remember what all of them were. But you know what? I think to your specific point about acquisition, I think the idea of acquisition and preservation of existing stock is really important. You know, if you're in a hole, as they say in English, you got to stop digging. I think that's really important, and my colleague Steve Pomeroy here is much more an expert on the acquisition program. I do think you'd have to do it at a much larger scale than is currently envisioned in order to materially support or stop the erosion or the loss of housing at scale. But I do think, again, you know, getting back to the housing crisis, ultimately we need a healthy housing system. We need adequately affordable social and non-market housing, which would be on the scale of 655,000 units. In my mind, we need a healthy, balanced rental market, and there's been some really important progress made there in the government's current housing plan. And we need to ensure as well that there's a healthy ownership market, because the whole housing system is a system and it's interconnected.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Madame Zarrillo for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to ask my questions to Mr. Pomeroy first. And you made some disturbing comments earlier about not having data, having lack of access to data, and I think that's part of the reason that we're here today, is that there was information in silos but not laid over each other. So in a report that you did in 2019, you highlighted the fact that purpose-built rentals at that time only accounted for 40% of all renters, with investor-owned condominiums becoming more pronounced and now making up more than a quarter of all starts in the major markets. So I just wanted to ask Mr. Pomeroy, do you think there are current federal policies encouraging the development of unaffordable housing? And I guess what I mean by that is the market lens, the market housing, fixing this problem?
Yeah, I mean, what you're referring to there, I mean, I think what we saw happen essentially between 1996 and 2016 was a very, very low level of private rental production. Roughly less than 10% of all starts, when a third of us are renters. That did increase massively in the last 6 years, from 20,000 a year to 80,000 a year in the last couple of years. So we've significantly increased rental construction, but that was primarily, as you say, on the private rental side. It was not specifically directed to creating affordable units. And obviously, as Mr. Horwood has pointed out, I mean, the market doesn't create affordable units. We need the non-market sector, the community housing sector, to do that for us. And with the lack of investment on that side, that's where we're missing in terms of addressing the kind of issues Tim Ricks is talking about, of housing that's affordable to folks exiting homelessness.
And can I ask, on the market side, is that stable housing? Is on-market rental housing stable, reliable housing for people?
We have a system in this country where provinces regulate rents, and we have various degrees of regulation across different provinces. I think in terms of security of tenure, we have a reasonably good system that protects tenants and puts in place mechanisms to protect them. Having said that, those mechanisms also allow for evictions for various reasons, one of which is you want to use the property for a family member, or you want tenants to leave so you can renovate. And our rent deregulation mechanisms, when that happens, allow rents to go up massively. And there is a sort of an unintended consequence of that regulation that does allow nefarious landlords to significantly raise rents, which is contributing to these 20% increases in rents. So, yeah, it's not working very well.
Thank you. And can I ask, do you think there's a federal place or there's a place for federal regulation there in securing tenure and stability for renters?
I think it's a difficult thing for the federal government to do. This is an area clearly of provincial jurisdiction, but I think Tim Richter made the point that we need a much more cooperative federalism with the federal government working with its provincial partners to say, look, this is your jurisdiction. You're all saying we've got an affordability crisis. Let's work together on this. And there certainly is precedent. As I mentioned it in a previous appearance of this committee. In 1975, in the anti-inflationary mechanisms, the federal government asked the provinces to bring in rent controls, and they all did. And I think if we now have a crisis, there's nothing stopping the federal government from using its moral suasion and working in collaboration with the provinces to change the regulations and remove or soften the vacancy decontrol mechanism, which is what's causing these massive increases in rents.
And could you share in your experience what were some of the key factors around making that provincial-federal relationship and ability to work together work? And is there something we should be doing more of here in the federal government to make sure that provinces are on side? And is there something that we should stop doing federally to make sure that provincial governments are on side?
Yeah, well, the mid-70s were a different time. Many of the provinces had only just gotten into the housing business. So, they only created ministries of housing in Ontario, for example, in 1974. So you had very relatively young provinces, and it was a much more collaborative set of arrangements. So I think it's that collaboration.
On that front, do you think that it was a good idea for the housing to go out to provinces in the 70s, or should it be brought more federally? Internally?
I think we had a period that the provinces did a very good job in this country, and certainly from 2001 to 2019, when the provinces were delivering the affordable housing program, many provinces did very good work. And I think what we've seen in the National Housing Strategy, the federal government becoming re-engaged. It became re-engaged when it had been out of the business for 20 years and really didn't have the capacities that it used to have. So I think, working in partnership with the provinces that had 20 years of experience of delivering those programs might have created better outcomes than we're seeing with very heavily weighted unilateral federal initiatives.
So thank you for that. And the CEO of CMHC has come here to this committee multiple times and did say that they had lost a lot of their expertise there. So if I think about the fact that we're in a crisis, that we need to get housing, not necessarily built, but certainly subsidized, maybe some housing that's already built, is there a place for, or what could you advise the government to do in relation to getting that skill set into CMHC and removing some of those, I think you were saying, multiple 20-page documents that folks need to fill out to get programs done?
I mean, I think, certainly the federal spending powers are a very important tool, but we've now got to the point of the National Housing Strategy where less than 10% of all the funding is going through the provincial mechanisms where the expertise largely was. 90% is going through the federal mechanisms where they really do lack that capacity. So I think rebalancing that, ramping up some of the programs that are funded under the bilateral agreements, particularly the Canada Housing Benefit, one of the bilateral programs that Tim Richter alluded to in terms of homeless prevention, would actually go a very long way to helping much more quickly address the affordability crisis than the federally focused loan-based programs that are predominantly supply without any affordability criteria or very minimal affordable criteria.
5 seconds, Madame Cirillo. Good. Thank you. Committee, before we move to the next round, it's my intention to conclude the second round with, as scheduled, 5-5, 2.5, and 2.5 before we go into committee business. And we have Mr. Morris in the room. If the committee agrees, I would give him a 2.5 as well. But we'll see.
Can I get a point of order, Mr. Chair? I didn't hear what you were saying. So we're getting 5, 2.5, 2.5, and then I'm sorry, what did you say about Morris? That there's an agreement on what?
I will go to Mr. Morris for a question as well.
Okay, and was that approved by the committee or?
No, I'm suggesting as chair, if the committee objects, the committee controls its own domain.
Okay, I object, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, then we'll conclude with the round as scheduled. Thank you.
Just a question. Is it do we vote on it to see if he gets time? I'm okay with him speaking.
No, you need unanimous. I just
Unanimous
sorry.
consent?
No, I'll move to deschedule as it's scheduled.
I have no
any
time.
member can share as they choose, but I'm reluctant to allocate without consensus of the committee. With that, we'll begin with the regular. Madame Falk, with 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. We know, and we've heard this over and over in this committee, and from our constituents as well, that we're in a housing crisis. We know that having a place to call home should not be out of reach for Canadians, and we do know after 9 years after this Trudeau government promised to lower the price of housing, rents and mortgages have doubled and not lowered. CMHC has said that to maintain current home prices, which are already too high, Canada has to increase home building by 50%. There's been lots of announcements, there's been lots of photo ops, but the reality is that housing starts are down across this country, and according to RBC, the housing crisis is only on track to get worse and not better. Mr. Horwood, if I could please start with you. I was just wondering if you could speak to the residential rental vacancy rates in the properties that Effort Trust manages. Are vacancy rates lower than usual? And has there been a trend in recent years? What does that look like?
Thank you very much for your question. I can confirm that the vacancy rates in our properties have typically been in a band that has been relatively narrow, and that we have had vacancy in and between the 4% at the high end down to as little as 1%. We have seen over the last 2 years that the vacancy has been fairly consistent between 1% and 2%. And I see that on the low end, and I see that on the dangerously tight end, in the sense that I'm advocating for more supply and more choices for customers, and I would be pleased to compete with others in my industry to attract tenants to our properties. So my sense is that we are amongst the lower end of the vacancy band that we have seen. And one other point that I would make is that we are noticing that our residents, our renters, are moving out with a far lower frequency. So we used to see turnover, people moving out of their apartments in the range of between 20 to 30% of the units every year would have a turnover. What we're finding that at the moment that is at or around the 10% range, which is the lowest I have seen in 27 years in the business.
Okay, so then in the cities that you operate, would you say that there is enough housing to meet the demand?
It is my opinion that there is not enough housing to meet the demand. We operate primarily in small and mid-sized markets around the Greater Toronto, Hamilton area. We don't do anything in downtown Toronto proper or downtown Ottawa proper, some of these, major cities, but we operate in cities like Hamilton, in Burlington, in Cobourg, in Kitchener, in St. Catharines. So important communities. And what we are finding is that the vacancy and the sort of the tightness of the rental market is as strong, if not stronger in some ways, in some of these, mid-size and smaller markets where we're operating.
So how much more supply do you think is needed, specifically in these centers that you're operating in?
Well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to speculate on that. I do know that we would like to be a part of the supply solution, and we would like to build more buildings in each of the markets where we're operating. We believe that there are opportunities for the private sector to bring mid-market, that is not low income or low rent, but mid-market attainable rentals across the spectrum and across the markets where we operate in every location. I believe that thousands and thousands of units in Hamilton in particular would be absorbed very, very quickly. I believe the net effect of that would be to provide more choice to consumers. And I believe that in the long run, that increased supply will help moderate pressures on increasing rents for both current renters and for prospective renters. Remember, many of the people for whom we are planning haven't arrived in our
Thank you.
markets
Sorry,
yet.
I have to move on. Chair, I'd like to pass my time to Ms. Gray.
Thank you very much. And I'll be quick here to bring up an important topic so we can get back to our witnesses. The Salvation Army and Food Banks Canada recently released very impactful reports, and therefore I'm moving the following motion. Given that a recent report from the Salvation Army indicates 1 in 4 Canadians continue to be extremely concerned about having enough income to cover their basic needs, this report found that the province of Quebec that in the province of Quebec, 74% of those surveyed said food insecurity was a challenge they faced in the last year. A recent report from Food Banks Canada indicates that Canada has reached a critical turning point as poverty and food insecurity worsen in every corner of the country. And this report also expresses concerns regarding the design of the Canada Disability Benefit, saying its proposed structure falls far short of the expectations that the government itself created and of the consensus among disability advocates. The committee recognizes and reports to the House that Canada is facing a rapidly worsening affordability, housing, and food insecurity crisis. And pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, the committee invite representatives from the Salvation Army and Food Banks Canada to appear before the committee to testify in relation to these findings as soon as possible for no less than 2 hours each, and that the committee find additional resources if necessary to facilitate this meeting. And this was circulated previously and should be in order, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Yes, the motion is in order for witnesses appearing. Ms. Gray has chosen to introduce a motion that she has on order. The committee must deal with this before we can return to the witness. So discussion on the motion of Ms. Gray. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, Madame Zarrillo.
Mr. Chair, I've got some questions about the procedure today. So we've got a motion right now, but we came to this committee and we didn't have a consensus or a discussion about going 2 hours, and we were just told that we're doing 2 hours. So I'm not sure if we are going to have the opportunity to discuss this motion for more than our limit of what time is it going to end in 4 minutes. So I just would like to get some clarity on how long can this open portion of the committee meeting go? And do we need to have the unanimous consent to go for 2 hours today? Because that was something that I wasn't told about in advance.
Thank you, Ms. Zarrillo. I was advised that the committee had the authorization to conduct itself for the full 2 hours, beginning at the time it began following the vote. I, as chair, called the meeting to order for the 2 hours because it's the direction of this committee to hold a 2-hour meeting today. So the committee is in order. We will use the first hour that we've been meeting on the housing report, on the housing motion study. Then we'll go in camera for the committee business part. Clear?
So, Mr. Chair, so we started at about 6 minutes after 5, is that correct? I just wanted to know what time we're finishing this.
We started right around 5 o'clock, but it's my intention, as I indicated earlier, to conclude the first hour after you get your 2.5 minutes.
So, Mr. Chair, can I move adjournment on this item so that we can get back to our witnesses quickly? We've got very short window.
Yes, motion to adjourn debate on this motion is in order. Did you call it?
Yes, I'd like to call it, please, and
okay,
I'd like to request that I would get the last minute or two.
We have a motion from Ms. Zarrillo to adjourn debate on the motion currently introduced. Record a vote on the motion of Ms. Zarrillo.
Mr. Fragiscatos?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
No, we could have been voting on it
Mrs. Falk?
to make it
Nope.
happen.
Mr. Tocher?
Clerk, can you confirm that this vote is in order?
Yes.
What? It is?
It's in order.
A vote on.
Continue. There was a motion duly made to adjourn, and I called it.
So, Mr. Tochor?
No.
No. Mr. Allison? No. Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Zarrillo?
Yes.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4, 4.
The motion has been adjourned. We'll now return.
While I was questioning the witness, I had a hard time hearing because the floor audio is so quiet in here and there was lots of chit chat all around. But when I put my earpiece in, there's that lag. So I just ask that either the room stay quiet or this gets fixed because it just was very, very distracting for me.
Thank you, Ms. Falk. I have using the earpiece, same as anybody else. I have it turned high enough that I can hear. People have the option of using the earpiece. That's your choice.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair, on this. It's not acceptable that there's a delay. And so that's the issue that and it's not even about interpretation. It's about hearing even within the same language that you might be
Ms.
speaking.
Gray,
And there's a delay. And so we actually can't hear
Thank you,
what the
Ms.
witnesses
Gray.
are saying. It's unacceptable.
The committee is operating under approved technology and hearing. So we'll return to the committee. Mr. Fragas-Catos and I'm still going to conclude with 5 minutes with Mr. Fragas-Catos, 2.5 minutes to Madame Chabot, and 2.5 minutes to Madame Zarrillo, and then we will suspend. So, Mr. Fragas-Catos, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to witnesses for being here today. Mr. Richter, I'd like to begin with you. We did hear at the outset of the questioning when Ms. Gray put certain questions to you that, yes, we're having an extremely difficult time, like almost every other democracy is, with homelessness. I suppose there's two courses of action that a responsible party can follow. One is to simply identify the problems. The other would be identify the problems and actually propose solutions. So would you say, Mr. Richter, that any party that is serious about addressing homelessness would offer solutions to deal with homelessness, and in fact would actually go as far as coming up with a housing plan that at the very least mentions homelessness? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. On that, and staying in that vein, $250 million has been proposed by the federal government in the most recent budget to address encampments. How do you think the best way to proceed would be with respect to encampments? How should that money be allocated to get to the best result?
I would, and I have been recommending to the government a housing-focused encampment response or housing-focused approach. I think that can be very effective in reducing encampments as we experience them today. I do think that this program has a lot of potential if it can be implemented quickly. It's going to be really important that this money get out the door as soon as possible in order to ensure that this is an encampment program for this winter and not next and the one after. But I do think it's important that, if you want to resolve encampments, we also need to be looking at slowing the flow of people into homelessness, which requires, some form of housing benefit. But as you suggest, also, it's very important to have that housing investment and that housing investment done quickly.
Also, Mr. Richter, you talked about, and Mr. Pomeroy, I'm going to come to you on this as well, sir, but you talked about the continuum of housing, starting with social housing and going all the way to home ownership. Just a few days ago, you would have seen the federal government made the largest investment in co-op housing in the past 30 years. How critical is co-op housing to addressing the overall housing crisis? It's one form of housing, and so I'm not making the case at all that this is the panacea, but we've heard some describe co-op housing as quote-unquote Soviet-style housing, and I think that going down that kind of path is is not just negative. I think it misses the entire point. But where can co-op housing fit with respect to addressing the challenges, the crisis that we face in front of us?
I think cooperative housing is an essential element. I think that program was a very smart investment that'll continue to reap benefits for decades into the future. So I would say I'm strongly supportive of it. It's a form of attainable home ownership, and yeah, I would say it was a very good idea.
Mr. Pomeroy, the place of co-op housing in addressing the homelessness crisis. I noted that you talked about co-op housing in your testimony.
Yeah, I mean, basically co-ops, of all the social housing we've created in this country, about 20% are cooperatives. They're another form of non-profit, and I think any form of non-market housing is beneficial in terms of creating housing that's permanently affordable and immune to market pressures that push up rents. So absolutely, a co-op alongside non-profits are a critical part of making sure the supply includes affordable supply.
Thank you very much. There's a minute left. I'll cede time to Mr. Morris.
And
the chair, would it be possible to add this minute to a minute from Madame Chabot?
Madame Chabot?
Oh, une minute, alors c'est deux.
Quickly, Madame Chabot, are you giving a minute to Mr.?
Je lui accorde une minute, pas plus.
Okay, d'accord.
Merci, Madame Chabot.
1 minute, no more.
Appreciate. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter, and Louise aussi. Merci. Mr. Pomeroy, I really appreciate the research you've done to help us identify where the cause of the housing crisis is coming from. Of course, part of it is the loss of affordable housing across the country. Your most recent research shows that actually my community is losing the most units for every new affordable unit getting built. For every one new affordable unit getting built, we're losing in Waterloo Region, or Kitchener-Waterloo at least, 39 units. In your research, you talk about plugging the holes in the bottom of the bucket. I assume you're referring to the erosion of those affordable units. You've talked about rent controls provincially as one part of that. Can you talk about what more is needed? Some have talked about, for example, removing the tax credits or incentives that real estate investment trusts have access to. Can you speak about what needs to be done federally to plug the holes in this bucket?
Yeah, and just for clarity, and this is data that compares the total number of units existing under $1,000 a month compared to the number of units built under affordable housing programs for each city. And certainly, Kitchener-Waterloo has the highest number. And in part, that's because of the change in the number under 1,000 has many units have moved above $1,000 a month. And also the number of units that have been created by Kitchener-Waterloo is less than in other cities. So that's how the ratio comes out of it. But absolutely, this loss, many of these units still exist, but they exist at higher rents. They exist at higher rents because there's very strong pressure on rental markets, because of high levels of demand coming both from new immigration and also from the fact that folks can't afford to own, so they stay in the rental market, and that puts pressure on the rental market as well. So we have these pressure points on the rental market pushing up rents in a regulatory environment that allows vacancy decontrol, and when units are turning over, the rents can go up quite dramatically, and we see monthly data from rentals.ca of rents going up 15, 18, 20% year over year. I mean, that's the key issue that's creating the affordability crisis. I think we temporarily need to take a look at vacancy decontrol mechanisms, but as I said earlier, that's not a federal jurisdiction, it's a provincial jurisdiction, and one that the federal government can only ask the provinces to take a look at.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Madame Chabot, pour 1 minute et 30.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Pomeroy. Several groups in Quebec, we heard it during a convention, said that we need as an objective of 20% of social housing when we look at affordable housing. And that's one of the proposals that that is being suggested. Right now, the non-market housing stock is at about 10%. So
would so that would be an answer to the crisis to have 20%. Are you in agreement with that proposal?
At the summit, the discussion was that 20% of the social housing should be 20% of all rental, as opposed to the total housing stock. But essentially, that means a doubling of the existing social housing stock, which is consistent with a report from Scotiabank last year, which suggested that Canada is half the OECD average, and we should try and double the size, which is the point Tim Victor made about 655 additional units. Correct.
Une autre problématique aussi, on parlait, en tout cas des provinces, je parlais du Québec où on a
Another problem that we had is that we had an agreement with Canada is that how can we be more nimble when it comes to housing programs to make sure that between the will, the money, and the idea that it wouldn't take 3 or 4 years for it to take place?
Processing problem. Many of these programs are loans-based, and the underwriting process is quite onerous. I think CMHC, in fairness, has accelerated the approvals process compared to the beginning of the National Housing Strategy. There's always room to do better.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Madame Zarrillo, for 2.5 minutes to conclude the first hour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to ask my questions to Mr. Richter this time, talking about Alberta and talking about just the housing rental crisis that's happening in Alberta. And I'm thinking specifically about Boardwalk. And I wonder, Mr. Richter, if you could just share some of the things that are happening in Calgary and Edmonton around rental housing and homelessness, and if you believe that the business practices of corporate landlords is contributing to that.
Well, I can't speak to that specifically but I do know, I think it's important that we remember in the rental housing market, about 40% of the overall market is owned by real estate income, like the REITs, and 60% is owned by smaller companies and individual investors. So the real estate income trusts can play a significant role, but they only really have an impact, I would say, in an undersupplied or a market where there's very low, where there's really, really tight supply and very low vacancy. And if there's lots of supply, individual market players can, again, have less and less influence. But I will say, speaking specifically to Boardwalk, so prior to leading the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, I led the Calgary Homeless Foundation. And between 2008 and 2012, we housed about 4,000 people straight out of homelessness into permanent housing. And I know that's also true across Alberta. And we were able to create affordable housing and house those people in a lot of them in Boardwalk apartments. In fact, we were able to reduce homelessness in Calgary for the first time since we were able to count in the early 1990s, and we didn't. Alberta wasn't.
Mr. Richter, I'm going to have to cut you off. Is that possible again, do you think?
Impossible to reduce
to have someone like Boardwalk or different REITs to solve this homelessness problem quickly to get people housed?
Yes.
And how would it do it?
Housing first.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to move to something else, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move a motion, Mr. Chair. I know that this committee asked Starlight Investments, the CEO, to come to this committee, and we received back that they didn't have, it wasn't going to fit their schedule to come. And I think that it's maybe a misunderstanding from the CEO of Starlight Investments that this is a parliamentary committee and that we work for Canadians, and that really we would like to have them here, and we wouldn't want to have to summon them, but it seems that we are going to have to. So I have a motion, Mr. Chair, that will be shared, that pursuant to Standing Order 108-1A, the committee summon the CEO of Starlight Investments, Daniel Jimmer, to appear before the committee by June 20, 2024, to testify in relation to the study on federal housing investments for a minimum of 2 hours. And in light of the testimony that we just had, that they could be part of the solution, I think it's even more pressing. Thank you.
Okay, I've been advised by the clerk that because the motion is in reference technically to the study we're doing, that it does not require the 48 hours. So it is in order for Madame Cirillo. It is in order for her to move to motion. We come to the end anyhow, so I'll get back to the motion. I just want to advise the witnesses that this concludes the first hour of the testimony, so you're free to leave while the committee discusses the item currently before it. So, witness, thank you for appearing today on this important study.
Thank you very much.
With that, we have Madame Zarillo's motion, Mr. Fragascatos, and then Madame Shabat.
Just going to ask for a suspension for a few minutes, Chair.
Okay, 2 minutes, we'll suspend.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais qu'on puisse recevoir cette...
I would like us to get this motion in writing, please, Mr. Chair, during this break. Ms. Miserillo, could we have it in writing, please?
It is being circulated while we're in suspension. So we'll suspend for 3 minutes. Suspend. back in session. We are still in the public portion of the meeting, and Mr. Fragascatos, you had the floor.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Just to ensure that all of us are on the same page with respect to the request for Starlight to appear at the committee, what has been the correspondence from Starlight? What have they said about appearing and why they do not want to appear?
The letter was circulated to all committee members. Their reasoning was because the two items in the motion requesting them coming here, they said is not relevant to their company. They do not, it said, Starlight has never received any federal loans, including those for the purchase of rental properties, and Starlight Investment is not seeking to evict any residents from 71, 75, and 79 Thorncliffe Park Drive, which was the substance of why they were requested to appear.
Okay, so with that in mind, I would ask Ms. Cirillo if she has information that would show otherwise, because that's a pretty definitive statement to say that there's no federal involvement. However, I'd want to give Ms. Cirillo the opportunity to respond to what they have said. And at the same time, I don't know if colleagues are open to this, but as I speak here, perhaps there's an opportunity for the company to appear as part of the study on an existing, as part of a panel of witnesses. We would still be able to hear from them. I don't know if, I just canvassed that idea as again, I speak.
Okay, before Madame Chabot had her hand. Madame Chabot?
Peut laisser Madame Zarillo répondre, bien sûr.
Well, I should let Madame Zarillo respond, of course. But quite honestly, there are perhaps businesses that are not in conformity. I'm trying to understand the objective here. We're doing a study on housing, and I hope that this is going to be a constructive community because we're trying to find solutions. I don't think, I mean, we could find lists of other people, even if I don't know who they are. What is this going to bring us in a committee to force them to appear to find out whether they do this or they do that? How is this going to be helpful for the study of this particular committee looking at the issue of housing? I think that the witnesses we've heard today have given us various avenues to look at how to remedy the housing crisis. I do not see the point of this motion, so I'd be definitely against it, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cirillo, you can respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the clarity. I'll start with Madame Chabot's concerns there and questions. And I think what we've heard in this testimony is that there's been a shift from home ownership in this country to rental housing, which we know has happened over the decades, and especially as housing prices increase. And we know that rental housing is an important factor. And we heard testimony today that there is an opportunity for the government to intervene into rental housing and make that happen. So I think that it's important and it's relevant to the study that we dig into rental housing. I did want to address the letter that came back from Starlight, and I'm actually on a site right now, renex.ca. There's some of their properties that are for sale, and here it says properties in the portfolio of Starlight have in place financing at fixed below market interest rates, of which a significant portion is Canada Mortgage and Housing Corp insured. The $425 million in CMHC debt with a weighted average 2.52% interest rate and remaining terms of 4.2 years is assumable subject to lender consent. So I think, I think we need to get some clarity on what's published. Starlight themselves has highlighted, even in some of their own press releases, that they have subsidies backed with public money. They're also, it's been widely reported about their evictions. It's been reported by CBC, CTV, The Hills Times, City News, Maclean's, and more. And if I had the time to pull it up, Mr. Speaker, I could share with you a story from CBC recently about some of their tenants being on a strike, and how Starlight has potentially served notice to some of their tenants. So I think all of these issues can be clarified when the organization comes to committee, when Mr. Drimmer comes to committee.
Thank you. Ms. Gray on Madame Cirillo's motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be brief, that I think it's a reasonable suggestion to have that organization come as on part of the panel for this study. We have 2 more meetings, and certainly that could be the witness that is the NDP witness that is at one of those meetings. So we think that that's very, very reasonable.
Okay, with that, we have to deal with the motion of Madame Cirillo. So, see no further discussion. Mr.
Amendment there. Right.
I didn't hear an amendment.
Okay, well, one of us is going to put forward an amendment. If someone's agreeing, then I would propose, Chair, to ensure that we do have the company come here, which I know is important to Ms. Cirillo. I know the company has a different view, but still it would be, I think, important for a colleague to ask questions of the company, and they could do so if the company comes and participates as part of a panel of witnesses as part of this study. So that would be I propose that amendment, Chair. I move that amendment.
That's great. We're now on the amendment of Mr. Frykes.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify for the amendment, would you be also removing the part about summoning then? Or because the motion is actually to summon, so are you removing the part just to clarify that that's actually summoning? Because we're going from, being asked to come to committee. There hasn't been any additional letters. There hasn't been an order, and the motion is actually going right to summoning. So I just want clarification if part of that amendment was to remove the summoning part.
Yes, that would be removed as well.
Okay. Thank you. To suspend for a moment while the clerk gets this clear. Suspend. Thank you for requesting that clarification. I'm going to go back to Mr. Fragascatos to read clearly into the record the amendment that he proposes.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies to colleagues. I think we all know how this works. Sometimes on the fly, and you don't put the words together as well as you could hope. Apologies also to the clerk. So, in any case, the exact wording is as follows: I move that, pursuant to Standing Order 108(1)A, the committee request. So the word "summon" is dropped. The CEO of Starlight Investments, Daniel Drimmer, to appear before the committee by June 20th, 2024, as part of a panel of witnesses with regards to the study on federal housing investments for the duration of the panel.
Okay, it's clear to members. It's clearly in the record, the amendment of Mr. Fragascatos. Seeing no desire for discussion on the amendment, I will call a recorded vote on the amendment of Mr. Fragascatos to the motion of Ms. Zerillo.
Mr. Fragascatos?
Yes.
Mr. Long? Yes. Mr. Collins? Yes. Mr. Coteau?
Yep.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Falk?
Yes.
Mr. Tochor?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Madame Chabot?
Non.
Ms. Zerillo?
No.
Yeas pour 9-9, nays contre 2-2.
We're now moving to vote on the motion as amended. Clear? So, clerk, record a vote on the motion of Madame Zerillo as amended.
Mr. Fragascatos?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Falk?
Yes.
Mr. Tochor?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Madame Chabot?
Non.
Ms. Zerillo?
Yes.
The motion of Madame Zerillo has been accepted. With that, the committee will suspend while we transition to in camera for committee business for the duration of the meeting. Suspend for 2 minutes while we transition. Suspend.